Pro-Palestine activists who have been on hunger strike face death, according to an NHS doctor. On Sunday, The Observer reported the comments of Dr. James Smith, a National Health Service emergency doctor who has been in regular contact with the families of the prisoners. He warned, "As a healthcare worker, I'm extremely concerned." He had not seen the prisoners, but explained, for someone who was previously well with no other underlying medical issues, at around 6 to 8 weeks on hunger strike, there's a very, very high risk of death. "I'm the most concerned about the substandard treatment in the prison system. From the information I'm receiving from the families, it doesn't appear to me that there has been, for most of them, a single day in which they have had a full set of their observations taken. Heart rate, blood pressure, blood sugar levels, proper weights." Since November, 6 Palestine Action activists have been on reprimand, refusing to eat unless an Israeli weapons company shuts down in the UK. A 7th activist joined in on the hunger strike last week. The 7 are Kessa Zura, Amu Gib, John Chink, Heba Mirazi, Tuta Hoxha, Cameron Ahmed, and Mohammed Umar Khalid. 5 of the 7 have only recently returned to prison from hospital, where they said they were handcuffed to officers throughout their stays. Prisoners have apparently been met with regular abuse, and they won't face trial until January 2027, so that's 18 months of being in reprimand. Astonishingly, David Lammy, the Secretary of State for Justice, apparently didn't know anything about the strikes.
There's been 4 weeks of hunger strikes. Why have you said nothing? Why have you said nothing?
My name is Shamina. I am a sister of one of the hunger strikers. We have been waiting for you to respond and the Minister of Justice to respond. There's 7 hunger strikers in the UK right now. They have 5 demands. We've got the letter for you. You've been waiting for a response.
I don't know anything about this.
My brother is on now day 25.
Really sorry, I don't know anything about this.
I know. They wrote to you about October, end of October. Joanna has been written to as well, and the Minister of Justice.
I'm happy.
Been hospitalised 5 of them.
Come on, David, let's go.
And they're like in the UK.
These people are doing what you should be doing. They're trying to stop a genocide.
We have rights around. They want fair trials. They want bail. They want Elbit shut down. They want the deportation of Palestine action. And they want to end the failed.
I mean, really? He didn't know anything about it? Well, Islington North MP Jeremy Corbyn wrote to David Lammy on the 20th of November to talk about one of his constituents who engaged in the hunger strike. Interesting. Now, earlier today, I caught up with Jeremy Corbyn to discuss the hunger strikes. Jeremy Corbyn, thank you so much for joining me today.
Pleasure. Nice to see you.
Good to see you. Now, for those who haven't heard about this, can you tell me what's going on in HMP Bronzefield?
There's a number of people being held on remand there who are charged under terrorism legislation relating to the issues at RAF Bryce Norton when Palestine Action went on to the airfield. And they're being held on remand, but their trial date has not been set until January 2027, which is, 14 months on from now. And they are very unhappy about that. They're very unhappy about the ban that's taken place, and they're very unhappy about the way the government has behaved towards them. And a number are on a hunger strike. And I went yesterday to visit one of my constituents who is on hunger strike and spent some time talking to them about this. And so I think it's important that the media as a whole report something so significant as a series of hunger strikes in British prisons. If you scan the mainstream daily papers, you wouldn't know anything about it. If you listen to the mainstream news, either on commercial radio, global radio, or on the BBC, again, not even a mention of it, which I find very, very strange. John McDonnell and myself raised points of order about this in the House today to ask why the Secretary of State for Justice, David Lammy, hadn't ever made a statement about this and why he hadn't replied to our letter. We held a meeting last week in Parliament of the members of Parliament representing constituents where they have somebody in prison who is presently on hunger strike, and that was a way of beginning to coordinate our parliamentary action on it. And so I want to make this case out that nobody should be held on remand in prison for an inordinate length of time. Normally, remand is assumed to be about 6 months. Indeed, that's the normal prison ruling, which is of itself quite a long time. But to be held for what will be more than 18 months by the time the case gets to trial, that almost amounts to executive detention, because these are held under the Terrorism Act.
We've heard reports of one activist being rushed to hospital who was partaking in the hunger strike, Cameron Ahmed's. They are risking their own livelihood for this. Do you think the government is putting these activists in danger?
I heard that Cameron had been rushed into hospital, and he is indeed one of them, but obviously he's not in HMP Bronzefield, where I was yesterday. That's a women's prison just outside London. Yes, they are putting their own lives in danger and at risk, and being on hunger strike, that is exactly what happens. You could look at it in the way it's a cri de coeur, because it's the only thing they've got left is their own body to say, I want to assert my right to peaceful protest, and I want to assert my solidarity with the people of Palestine. None of them have undertaken any action for their own personal benefit or personal gain. None of them gain anything from this. None of them are going to be wealthy or anything else as a result of this. They're all taking this because they believe very strongly that Britain is morally wrong in supplying arms to Israel, in giving facilities to Israel for delivery of weapons through the RAF base in Cyprus, by supplying parts for the F-35 jets, and by the surveillance flying over Gaza, which the government now tells me is no longer taking place. So they're standing up for a principle that genocide is wrong. And I think they have more moral courage than any aspect whatsoever of the government's policy in relation to the Palestinian people.
So apparently, David Lammy says he doesn't know or didn't know about the hunger strike. What do you make of this? And is there anything you'd like to say to him?
Well, I saw that clip that he apparently didn't know anything about it. I find that utterly astonishing. If you're the Secretary of State for Justice and you have ultimate responsibility for the prisons and the prison system, you get daily briefings from your officials of what's going on. I cannot believe that senior officials in the Ministry of Justice did not alert him to the political and publicity issues, if nothing else, surrounding a hunger strike. So for him to say on the record that he knew nothing about it, I find utterly unbelievable. And that's why we have written him a letter demanding a meeting with him. But in fact, a letter had been sent to him long before that anyway. And so either he is unaware of correspondence he receives from parliamentary colleagues, or he just chose not to know on the day. I mean, it's absurd.
Okay, finally then, you mentioned how the media, the mainstream media, hasn't really spoken about this. I'm astonished that the BBC haven't picked up on this. In your view, why do you think the mainstream media doesn't find this at all interesting?
Because the parliamentary vote on banning Palestine action was designed to have a suppressive effect on activists, on journalists. The huge number of arrests that have been made on what I actually believe to be acts of civil disobedience, not acts of terror by any stretch of the imagination, shows what the effect of this legislation is. And the judicial review that's going on has not reached its conclusion yet. That is judicial review into the government's decision making on this. So we don't know what the final outcome would be. But it's already had the effect the government wanted. It's reduced the number of demonstrations, made a lot of people very, very nervous. And anyone who gets either arrested or ultimately possibly even convicted, in the atmosphere in this country, they could well lose their employment. They could well lose their prospects for jobs in the future. And it could create for them enormous personal and financial difficulties, which is why I want to see the ban overturned. And I want to see a much more inclusive, open, liberal democracy in our society. But all the directions are the other way. At the moment, we have the threat to trial by jury, which is now actively being debated. We have the threat to people who are living in Britain with indefinite leave to remain. The word indefinite appears to be changing. The whole definition appears to be changing, and they're no longer secure. And we now have, additionally to that, the idea of a digital ID system, which would mean that all our actions, all our transactions, all our movements would be permanently trackable by central government, on top of facial recognition that's happening particularly at London Underground stations and other places at the moment. Indeed, some supermarkets are undertaking facial recognition. So there's something deeply worrying about all this. And 2 days ago, there was a debate in the secondary debating chamber in Parliament, Westminster Hall. Normally, debates in Westminster Hall are attended by the minister, the opposition, a Liberal Democrat, whichever member is proposing the subject, and maybe one or two others, but a very usually quite low attendance, and they're quite specialized subjects. The one on digital ID cards was absolutely overwhelmed to the extent there was no seats left for the members who wanted to speak in the debate. To his credit, Sir Edward Lee, who was in the chair, allowed members to speak whether they were actually physically sitting in the chamber or not, and many of us made our contribution on it. That's a sign of concern. And when 3 million people sign an online petition about ID cards, that says something about the serious concerns people have about civil liberties in our society.
Jeremy, I know you're not the only person speaking up against this, but you still are. I just want to say thank you so much for highlighting this really, really important issue, and thank you for your work.
Bless you. Thank you very much. We'll do all we can here and carry on doing it.